All right. Welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're at. Got quite a few people joining, and I'm sure some people will be watching this after the fact as well. So I just wanted to quickly go through the Khorne roster reveal. I thought about making a video like I did for the Kislev roster reveal, but I kind of wanted to do this live for a few different reasons. Number one, it's less work editing, which while I do enjoy editing to a degree, I'm getting better at it. Sometimes, certain days, I just don't have the time. It does take up quite a bit more time. So there's that. And yeah, I also just wanted to be able to interact with some of you guys here live, get your thoughts on some things. So let's talk about Khorne. First things first, kind of a few initial things from the outset. I know I complained a little bit about the Kislev roster being small, and Khorne's roster is even smaller, but somehow it doesn't feel as bad. Like, I kind of expected all the Chaos Gods factions to have potentially smaller rosters, given that they are kind of coddling together the demons plus warriors potentially, right? Once we kind of learned that, and we learned there were going to be god-specific factions, I did kind of expect them to be a little bit more limited than Kislev and potentially Cathay as well. So I guess it's not as much of a letdown for me. One legendary lord is pretty interesting, but again, there's kind of the way I see it is it's almost like 4 sub-factions of a single faction, right? So I don't know, because of the amount of factions that we're getting. Again, it's not as much of an issue for me for Khorne. I will say though, Khorne, excuse me, out of any of the armies for Game 3, Khorne I think potentially has the most potential to be cheesed and to be cheesy. It's kind of the vampire counts effect, right? Where if your roster is extremely limited and one-dimensional in a certain aspect, you can very much lead to opponents trying to cheese you, and in return you trying to cheese opponents, because Khorne is like the melee faction, right? Like, you look through pretty much all their units here, the way they're described in their little lore blurbs, is to say that they're like the best of the best melee combatants of that class of unit, which makes sense. But they have almost no ranged units. Apparently, Game 3 also doesn't believe in chaff at all. Like, there's no... like, chaff is canceled, guys. In case you didn't know, chaff is canceled. Like, Kislev didn't have real chaff. Doesn't look like Khorne has chaff. It almost seems like a little bit of an oversight to me, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Kind of getting ahead of myself here. So yeah, let's just start. I am actually going to go through the roster this time. Skarbrand is the big boss. Bloodthirster, basically, he is the legendary lord of Khorne. The ludicrous force on the battlefield. I love that description of it. And as we'll see with a lot of the Khorne stuff, and as you've probably seen from some of my videos if you've watched them in the past, the Khorne stuff, the Khorne demons and other units get charged up by getting kills. And yeah, I'm curious to see exactly how this works in battle. They talked a little bit about it here and there, but it's definitely interesting. He's got these unique abilities here. I'm probably not going to go through this again because they haven't explicitly, strictly defined what all these are going to be. It's hard to speculate, but yeah, we'll kill until the killing's done. See, like, I don't know, it doesn't really tell me a lot here. Oh, he does have, I think they talked a little bit about this, some kind of enrage mechanic. Based on some of the posts I've read about it, it's potentially going to be like an AoE enrage on your opponent, activatable on like a short cooldown with a short uptime. Not necessarily short cooldown, but with a short uptime is what I saw they were kind of thinking about. But again, still not final, which is why they haven't really strictly defined anything. Yeah, he's ludicrous, exactly. Skarbrand's going to be a lot of fun, definitely. He'll be a huge pain to deal with, as will most of this Khorne stuff. We'll talk about potential weaknesses later. Exalted Bloodthirster, this is just like the Lord-level Bloodthirster, right? And the Herald of Khorne actually comes in as a Lord choice, looking to be more of a support character. They are the top tier of the Bloodletters. Yeah, they get Juggernaut mounts, and they also get a Blood Throne, which we'll get to in a minute, which looks very, very fun. Obviously, the Bloodthirsters get no mount options, so interesting for Khorne. You've just got the two kind of fighter-type lords, but the Herald of Khorne definitely fulfilling more of a support role. We'll see how the interactions play out. Sometimes support lords can be better, and a lot of it depends on cost and kind of their mount options as well, but probably for Khorne, you're going to want to take one of these monster lords anyway. We'll see, though. And this is interesting, this hero, this cultist of Khorne, this is kind of an interesting... Yeah, and if I can find the screenshots here, I do actually have the screenshots on hand, and I believe the unit card for this guy was in one of these. Yes, this is the one here. So, if we have a look, this, I guess, is the cultist, right? This unit card right here, and weirdly enough, this lord doesn't actually have a lord icon. I wonder if this is just a little bit of an early kind of in-development thing. This, seeming to be Lord level Bloodthirster doesn't have the correct icon here, but I guess this is the cultist, right? So he looks to be somewhat of a mortal dude here. I don't know if we can actually see him anywhere on the map, really. We do see the Minotaurs of Khorne, which we'll get back to in just a minute. Some of the other unit cards for like the Chaos Warriors, Bloodletters, some other things we'll get to. Fleshhounds. Yeah, fun stuff. But this guy, apparently he's going to be on the campaign map, I'm guessing, based on what they say here. I think you might be able to build like chaos cults in mortal settlements. The cults of Khorne can be found across the world, less fond of the clandestine trappings that accompany the other dark powers, the blood cults. Hey, thanks Ryan, appreciate it. Bloodletters have chaff stats unless they get their kill buff. And almost identical stats to Marauder Great Weapons with AP. Yeah, we'll see about their cost. I am a little bit surprised to not see Marauders of Khorne, given that we kind of saw some in one of the trailers, and even in some of the promotional images there appear to be Marauders of Khorne. We'll get back to that in just a minute. But, yeah. We'll see, Mr. Chemical. Yeah. Elite Infantry should be performing better, but we'll see. I mean, as it is right now, as long as they definitely perform better against monsters. Artillery and missile units and magic are still a problem, but yes, we'll see about cost and such. But anyway, these guys, clandestine trappings that accompany other dark powers. So I'm guessing these cultists can potentially like infiltrate opponents on the campaign map, like your, their lands, and potentially spread cults or something. I don't really know. I don't want to read into it too much, but it definitely sounds cool. Blood cults quickly take hold in arenas and fighting pits. Yeah. Some will aspire and rise and become true champions of Khorne, but there are plenty eager supplicants. Some ride a great warhorse, so really only a warhorse steed for the time being. But Mortal Follower of Chaos, definitely very interesting on the campaign map. It's interesting that we don't get like a Lord of Khorne, right? Like a true like mortal champion. Like we seem to get only this kind of like aspiring dude, cultist, right? It's kind of not exactly an aspiring champion, but you know what I mean. Aspiring to be a champion. Then the Blood Reaper, basically just like a Bloodletter hero, right? So you've got a Lord level Bloodletter, you've got hero level Bloodletter, you've got basic Bloodletter infantry, also Chaos Warriors. We've seen all these guys, all looking very cool. And like, okay, this is what I'm talking about. This is the image I use for the thumbnail, right? If we can kind of zoom in here. Yeah, it's Khorne dudes, right? And we've got this guy here who appears to be a Khorne Marauder. I don't know if this guy is actually the cultist or something, but I mean, he looks like a Marauder fellow. And in one of the trailers, again, I think you see some of the bear cab for Kislev eating some Marauders. So it almost seems like an oversight to me to not have the Marauders of Khorne in here if they're going to do something like that. Or maybe that's something they decided to cut in development, or I'm not really sure. But given the lack of low-tier stuff for both of these factions we've seen so far, it's going to be interesting. Anyway, yeah, they all have Frenzy, and they instead of great weapons, they have dual hand weapon version, which should be very good, actually. Berserkers are quite good. If they have massive weapon strength like them, will be awesome. Bloodletters here. Well, for Khorne, probably they will have some spell resistance. It's hard to say, but Yeah, I know the demons for sure have spell resistance, and the way they're reworking magic resistance versus spell resistance, right, is it's actually changing so that it no longer applies to magical attacks from like basic melee and missile attacks. It will only apply to spell damage, which is why it's being called spell damage, right? Um, so you have just the basic blood letters and exalted blood letters. So I mean, they're taking the blood letters to the max, right? You have the basic ones, exalted ones, hero ones, and a lord level one, right? Like, okay, lots of blood letters. Get it? We get it. Khorne really likes his blood letters. And then Gorby's chariot here. So they have the model for the chariot in and of itself. I was a little bit disappointed. I did see one of the screenshots what appeared to be just Gorby's infantry in and of themselves, even so much so that I kind of predicted they would have that, but I guess not. I guess they decided just to go with the Gorby's chariots, not have the Gorby's as a unit for the time being. A little bit disappointing, but here we are. Yeah. I'm not really the person to ask about lore, like potential characters they could add, other things like that. I'm really just here to talk about multiplayer ultimately. But Gorby's chariots are quite good, so I'm excited they're getting them. And they should have, again, Frenzy. They basically talk about here constantly in Frenzy, right? So yeah, puts them at a disadvantage when it comes to defense, but that's fine. Cheapest option for cavalry in quotations, which is interesting. Khorne, it will definitely suffer from the expensive low model count problem of armies, I think, in general. Which could be an issue for sure. We'll come back to that in a minute. But they do have blood crushers and skull crushers, right? So, in terms of the difference, here it looks like the blood crushers are shock cavalry, providing, yeah, demonic shock cavalry. Let's see, these guys here, it doesn't necessarily say. I'm curious to see the dichotomy, and obviously these guys are going to have physical resistance, maybe a little bit lower armor, like what we saw in the early access battle, right? Versus the skull crushers. I'm sure basically it will come down to, depending on the matchup you want to take, one or the other. Probably against, like, I don't know, let's say Dark Elves, where the Soul Stealer is a potential issue for cav fights. Maybe you take the Blood Crushers, whereas against, I don't know, Dwarfs or another faction where you don't necessarily need the spell resistance, maybe it's better to take the Skull Crushers. It'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. I don't know if they'll... Yeah, I mean, most caster characters, most things in general will probably get eaten by Bloodthirsters in Melee. The issue is kiting. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. So they have Chaos Warhounds. This is probably going to be the cheapest unit on the roster, depending on how expensive regular Bloodletters are. But they're going to be fast. Then you have the Fleshhounds of Khorne, which are going to be, they said, fulfill a similar role later in the tech tree. I'm guessing the Fleshhounds will be around the same price as like a Norskin Ice Wolf. Kind of similar in terms of functionality, but they'll probably be AP and just more damaging and have magic attacks instead of Frostbite. The Furies of Khorne, also, again, we see probably that the other Chaos gods are going to get their own version of Furies. Yeah, little fast-flying attack units. Will be great for disrupting stuff, you know, getting on skirmishers, making sure you don't get absolutely bunker busted on the approach. Yeah, I mean, they don't really go into a lot of detail here. You could potentially even see more detail on the differences in my previous video about this stuff, but yeah. From what I read here, it seems like the Blood Crushers might have more of a charge orientation as well, whereas the Skull Crushers might be more for sustained melee combat. I don't really know, though. Chaos Furies. Yeah. I think it does say Callers of Khorne give them incredible spell resistance. Excuse me. I'm fine. Yeah, so it does appear that the Fleshhounds will have massive magic resistance, which is awesome. Or sorry, I should go back again. Not magic resistance, spell resistance. And for those of you just joining, you should remember that in Game 3, they're going to rework how magic resistance works, right? So it will no longer apply to magic attacks just from melee and missile attacks. It will only apply to damage from spells and probably like abilities as well, like, explosions or, bound, whatever, Miss of the Lady, Mortis Engine, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it'll be good for sure, but when do you actually use, like, spells to blow up Hound type units? I mean, it will happen occasionally, something like a Searing Doom or a quick explosion spell, but I don't know. It's good. I don't know if it's going to be incredible in the context of multiplayer. Depends on how much. If it's like 50% magic resistance, then yeah, that is pretty good. Or sorry, spell resistance. I gotta get in the habit of changing that. Spawn of Khorne. We saw this before. I'm interested to see if all the Chaos Gods get their own version of Spawn. Would be cool. But it is a little bit more recycling, which is some people are not that big of a fan of. Yeah. Oh, Minotaurs of Khorne. We've seen these guys already. I'm curious to see if the Beastmen will end up getting them, and this kind of relates to the Warriors of Chaos as well, if they'll end up getting a lot of this stuff on their roster. I don't know how they'll end up handling that, and certainly if they don't do it, modders will, so we can at least look forward to that. Yeah, definitely going to look very cool based on the concept art here. And then they do come in two variants, dual axes and great weapons, so no shield variant makes sense. Maybe Nurgle will get a shield variant only. Yeah, small monogod demon armies, exactly. It's all very expensive, and this is... Kislev was pretty top-heavy as well. I'm wondering if they just forgot to design low-tier units for everything, because they got so caught up in designing the cool stuff, which is, all the upper-tier stuff. But this one right here, the, Okay, I am just reading through this again. It looks like the Minotaurs of Khorne actually might have more armor. Look at this. Armored, armor-piercing, fearless, and destructive. So they are actually armored. The Khorne Minotaurs will be armored. That is going to be interesting. Definitely help solve one of the issues of Minotaurs. The question is how armored, right? Interesting. Very, very interesting. But yes, we did get the Soul Grinder of Khorne. This is probably one of the coolest new units that we're going to get. I know a lot of people were quite happy about this, and this is something that I figured we'd probably get it at some point, I just didn't know when, but it's definitely one of the coolest looking units, in my opinion, for Warriors of Chaos. This, like, spider crab mech demon thing. Yeah, low tier units equals new DLC announced. I was saying that at the opening, Hargrovius. That even though this roster is smaller than Kislev, I kind of expected all the monogod armies to have relatively small rosters in comparison, because they're all kind of like 4 sub-factions of the same faction, is the way I kind of put it, right? But... And like, this is a cool unit. I'm definitely very glad we're getting this. I do think there's some issues with the Khorne roster, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. I think the Soul Grinder has always been for both 40k and for fantasy. A lot of the demons models are for both 40k and fantasy, so that's just kind of how it goes. Yeah, big thing is lack of Chosen and Knights. Chosen is... I don't know. We'll probably see them eventually as well, but it is just the lack of Chosen and the Marauders, too, that we even, like, again, saw in some of the trailers, like I mentioned earlier. This guy's abilities, though, excuse me, can fire its extremely powerful weaponry while on the move and charging the enemy. Okay, so it appears to have a ranged attack, then? Highly resistant to physical and magical harm, and really tremendously awful to kill. Okay, so can fire its extremely powerful weaponry while on the move and charging the enemy. So apparently it does have some kind of ranged attack. That is pretty interesting. Again, I'm not really familiar with this guy from the tabletop, so for those of you guys who are more up on the lore can enlighten us in chat. Maybe all Chaos will share Marauders, Infantry, and Missile Cav. I don't know, though. Maybe. And that's the thing, Anthony. I would be fine if Warriors of Chaos were the only ones that kept the Knights and the Chosen. Like it would be, in my opinion, also pretty cool if they got selected units of the Warriors of Chaos stuff. Like if they got the Skull Crushers, right? The like champions of Khorne riding the Juggernauts. If the Warriors of Chaos sake like got just that unit, or Beastmen again get just the Minotaurs of Khorne. Like if you also like spread some of those new units out over the older factions as well, then obviously, the god-specific factions get to keep their unique stuff like the Soul Grinder and the Blood Shrine of Khorne and the Skull Cannon, which we now see all three here. If I can actually pull up, I have this as a screenshot so we can take a closer look at these three. All very similar. Whoops. There we go. So here we've got the mount earlier that was mentioned for the Lord and Hero type of the Bloodletters. This is the Blood Throne, I guess. You can see a little throne there. Or what? Yeah, that's it. This is the Shrine, Blood Shrine, right? So this is another unit, I believe. And then we've got the Skull Cannon here. All looking very, very cool. Let's take a look at their abilities and such. The Skull Cannon, and I was thinking it did this in the... I didn't confirm it because I couldn't quite tell in the early access battle, but it seemed to me that didn't have very much ammunition, but you could then go eat people and get more ammunition, which is kind of a nice way to solve the kiting issue, but at the same time, we'll talk more about that in just a minute. The answer to battlefield artillery, so it does give you at least one long-range missile unit to potentially try and counter-skirmish with, which is really nice, can fire and move. It does seem to be pretty quick as well. A lot of it will depend on the cost, but the damage output's also decent. It's not going to be great against big hordes of stuff, but it'll probably be pretty good against single entities. The Blood Shrine boosts morale for nearby allies, which... Demonic instability, again, for those of you guys who are new to the channel, maybe haven't seen or heard, in my developer interview, which I never actually got to release the audio for, they told me demonic instability it's like crumbling, but it does a lot more damage. Demons tend to have higher leadership, so it's harder to get them to, become unstable. But once they do, they're going to diminish quite a bit quicker than undead units do. Like, it just does more damage, so... Leadership buffs for demons actually could be pretty important, depending on, kind of how that math ends up playing out. And it also heals, so that will give you some kind of tank unit to try and sustain in more of attrition-style fights, which is going to be something Khorne, I think, is really bad at. We'll see. But, yeah. Near-living chariot designed to grind lesser creatures beneath its wheels. Love it. Absolutely love it. Bloodthirster, of course, basic Bloodthirster monster. So, again, relatively top-heavy roster. It depends a lot on how much some of these monsters and so on cost, but this roster, I think, and I said this as well at the beginning, I think Khorne is definitely going to be either the cheesiest or the most cheesed. By that I mean that you look at the factions that are the most limited, right? Like vampire counts having no ranged units at all, right? Even like Warriors of Chaos, Norska, like the factions with extremely limited range tools, often can get kite cheesed by factions which are very good at kiting. Like already I can just see nightmare scenarios of Wood Elves versus, or like Lizardmen even with the mass poison missile kite, of just nightmares of just getting dragged down into the dirt by endless missiles and not really being able to do a lot about it. I mean, granted, you do have the Skull Cannon, which will allow you some counter skirmish, but like definitely I think like Wood Elves, Dark Elves could be tough matchups. Lizardmen I think may be a little bit too slow, but we'll see if they end up changing how poison missiles work. A lot of people have been advocating for that, but expect to see Chaos Undivided get lower tier demons. Yeah, makes sense for sure. Okay, let me just quickly get caught up on comments here, kind of interrupting my thoughts mid. Yeah, again, this is kind of to my point. Yeah, 100% perfect for campaign, but in multiplayer, I do think it's going to be very kiteable. Now, that being said, the best melee faction, right? So up against some, like, I actually think, I said they're not going to be great at attrition. The best attrition faction, because a lot of the Khorne stuff, like, feeds on getting more kills, I wonder if vampire counts, it's just going to be, like, you can't really play attrition, because if you feed them too many kills, like, they'll just get so strong. It just depends on whether you can wear them away quickly enough before they get powered up quickly enough. It actually kind of turns into a DPS battle at that point, right? Raid phase, if you will. DPS check. But okay, so Soul Grinder has a Harvester Cannon. Okay, so it will have some ranged attacks. That's cool. Then the Soul Grinder at least provides you another potential tool to go up against counter skirmish, right? Depending on how much range it has, how much damage it does. I'm guessing because it's a single entity, it'll probably have a pretty impactful missile attack, hopefully. So, Warriors of Chaos will get a mark system. Yeah, a whole totally reworked mark system. I really hope so. A cultist hero, a few other human units. I get that they didn't want to put the focus too much on the mortal followers of Chaos, but I do think it would have helped to add like Marauders or something else in the lower tier. Yeah, light on lower tier infantry is a little bit awkward for a lot of multiplayer matchups for sure. Cheese and cheesed. Yeah, grilled cheese in between two slices of cheese. They do have artillery, yeah, and they'll be able to do some amount of certainly more counter skirmish than vampire counts, which is nice. They're also, it seems like they're going to be faster on the whole than vampire counts, so potentially like missile infantry won't be able to kite them very well. Yeah, maybe what else will actually be okay. I look at a lot of this demon stuff that's squishy and squishy low model count and limited ability to counter skirmish. To me, just screams "kite me, daddy!" Like, so, yeah, I don't know. Especially given that they don't have any magic as well. Like, you do have some spell resistance kind of across the board, which is nice, but yeah, I think about dwarfs also in that way, and there are things you can do against the dwarfs, like the disruption becomes a little bit more of an issue, right? And yeah, you just miss out on some cheap damage, basically, from damage spells as well. Yeah, I mean, Born to Rule, this channel is kind of focused on multiplayer, so I don't know what you're expecting from me. If you really want, like, MLG campaign analysis, probably go somewhere else. And it shouldn't be construed that I'm complaining. I'm speculating on what the reality will be of their situation. All factions have good and bad matchups, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that there's this asymmetric design, right? It's just going to be the reality of the situation, like how it is with the vampire counts, right? Vampire counts are cool, flavorful. A lot of people think. I'm not really the biggest fan of the design of Crumbling as it is, but I mean, they are mostly functional at this point in multiplayer, right? They still have their good and bad matchups, and that's fine. All factions will in a game that's this asymmetric. I'm just, again, speculating on what those good and bad matchups will actually be and the weaknesses and strengths of Khorne as a faction in multiplayer. Yeah. It will be good for rush factions, and like greenskins, for example, are probably going to get raffle stomped by Khorne. Like, they will, I mean, granted, they have some of the best skirmish cav in the game, but I'm pretty sure you'll be able to route those skirmish cav relatively easy. And yeah, like the factions that rely, like Beastmen probably as well, Norska. Lizardman's an interesting one. It depends kind of how, again, if they change some of the characteristics of poison missiles. I could see Lizardman having a pretty tough time against Khorne. Like factions that rely on a lot of melee punch, they're going to have a bad time against Khorne. And that's why I was speculating too with vampire counts. Like, I just don't know if they'll have enough. It'll really come down to whether you have enough healing and damage at the same time versus, if Khorne can just absolutely dish it out in time. That's one of the more interesting ones in my mind, because, two very melee-centric factions just absolutely slaughtering each other, I think, is appropriate. Yeah, they're not going to be playing defensively. That's very, very much true. And based on what they've said and what I saw as well, that the Skull Cannon's also pretty quick, right? It can reposition quickly, and it's even incentivized to go into melee and fight. You almost have to, probably, depending on the base ammo count. Like, if it only has, like, say, 4 or 5 shots, and then you have to go, eat things to get more ammo, it'll be pretty interesting. Definitely be interesting. Khorne, pretty small, fairly straightforward, but yet there's potentially a lot of nuance here. And if you've played a lot of Rush, you'll know that like there's definitely different forms of Rush. And I do think in the mobility game as well, thinking about their lack of cavalry, hounds are often good enough to suffice in a lot of matchups where you're not worried about necessarily super heavy stuff. And depending on how good fleshhounds are on offense, you might not even be worried about lower tier heavy cavalry necessarily if you can just beat them straight up with like numbers of fleshhounds and the regular warhounds as well. I'm a little concerned about the lack of slows for Khorne, given that they're so melee centric, but I'm hoping they're just going to be fast enough that it won't matter too much. Slaanesh should probably be faster, but yes, Rave Vazar, yes, absolutely. Yeah, well, you'll still be able to play Kite to a degree, but it's going to change things for sure, and it still remains to be seen whether that will become the dominant mode for tournaments. But definitely helps in that way, for sure. But yes, I do think this will be the ultimate Rush faction. That's kind of by design. That's what they're supposed to be, is like the strongest straight up Rush faction. Which right now, that title is currently probably held by the Greenskins. Maybe it will change to the Beastmen once they get their DLC. Probably what I'm thinking, Zach, is that probably the Fleshhounds, if you look at like Norskin, like the difference between Norskin Warhounds and Ice Wolves, probably Fleshhounds will be more like, they'll be like Ice Wolves, right? Well, they'll count as large, have a slightly lower model count, they'll do way more damage, and if you look at the weapon strength, I think Ice Wolves do something like 46 weapon damage, which is pretty crazy actually. Fleshhounds will probably be AP like versions of that, and instead of Frostbite, have magic damage. They're around the same price as Ice Wolves too. I mean, you take like 4 Warhounds, 4 of these guys. That's a huge mobile like attack force that's going to be surprisingly strong. Be somewhat squishy. You'll need to make sure you get good charges and good engagements, but man, you'll be able to just chunk down like scattered, slower, heavy cavalry and other things like that. Could be very interesting. Yeah, it would encourage players to go super elite against them. That's true, Born to Rule, but at the same time, um, like your elite units will probably lose 1 versus 1 to the Khorne elite units in melee. So it'll be interesting, almost like Elite Kite, maybe. I don't know. Well, different factions will have to approach Khorne in very different ways, I think, depending on the tools you have available to you. But thinking about it from Empire's perspective, Khorne presents some problems because the really strong, just straight up rush factions, like Empire traditionally has a little bit of a tougher time against. Like if you can't counter rush them hard enough, like oftentimes the very aggressive rush factions you can't really protect your missiles against. So you end up in this situation where you have to like countercharge with lots of knights and like prayer buffs and stuff. But if that's not enough to win against, like, say, Khorne, you can have some problems probably with the Empire. But no magic healing for them. Well, they have lots of fire damage, so probably magic healing isn't going to be very good against them. I mean, it'll be good for sure to try and out-sustain. But it does seem like a lot of their units have fire damage as well. So are there any other units that could be added? Yeah, I mean, they could add, like, the dual hand weapon Warriors of Khorne. That's like unique, right? That's not something that Warriors of Chaos have, is a dual hand weapon warriors. The Skull Crushers of Khorne, I think, is another one they could potentially add. This is very unique to Khorne, these juggernauts, kind of ridden by the Khorne champions. I could see them adding that to Warriors of Chaos. Maybe, again, some of the lower tier demons, like maybe either Flesh Hounds or the regular Bloodletters. I'm not sure. Something in that realm. Yeah, I could see them adding any of those three, I guess, would be good candidates, or four. Here's the thing, if Sigvald, regardless of what Creative Assembly decides, someone will mod it, right? And this is, not to go off on too much of a tangent here, but there's, certain rules of the internet, we won't get too deep into it, but certain rules say that if there is something to be done, someone will do it. And that definitely applies to mods in this context. Like, if you want Sigvald to be on Slaaneish's roster and Creative Assembly doesn't ever make a way for that to happen, whether that be an in-game mechanic, I don't think they would just straight up move him. But I do think that maybe there's some mechanic where you can recruit him in campaign, and maybe he's also available to Slaanesh in multiplayer. Who knows? But if Creative Assembly doesn't do it, modders will, right? So that's one thing to also look at, again, in the context of like the Minotaurs of Khorne or these various units. People will make mods to combine them, so look forward to that at least. Undivided Demon? I don't know. I mean, I guess we could see some, like, they could add Undivided Furies, or, Unclaimed Furies, if you will, or, yeah, I don't know. The Undivided, I think, probably will end up having Chosen be unique. We'll see. Right now, there's no Chosen for Khorne, which some people are upset about. I think that's probably fine, to be honest, for the time being. It helps keep Warriors of Chaos Undivided a little bit more unique. But Rohan's leave Sigvald to me. uh Yeah, it will be hard to go wide with Khorne for sure. So far, I kind of joked about this at the opening of the stream. Chaff is canceled, guys. In Game 3, just so you know, Chaff is canceled. Like, Chaff doesn't exist. No such thing. Yeah, and given that we have specifically like Furies of Khorne, I could see them doing just Chaos Furies and adding that to Warriors Undivided. Maybe we have a Demons Undivided too that just has all the demons from all the different rosters and no Warriors units. Yeah, a lot of people have been advocating for them to merge Warriors of Chaos and Norsca, and I'm definitely against that. I think they should just flesh out Norsca more. Dogs equals chaff? Yeah, that's probably what it'll be. But, like, they're not really meant to be chaff, right? I don't know. They're not. In this list, they say that it's the cheapest unit. If we go down here and look, where are they at? Here we go. Lowest tier unit in the Khorne army, but poor fodder to hold a front line. Yeah, they're not really meant to hold a front line at all, in the same way that like low tier infantry are, which is interesting. Khorne is definitely going to be interesting in multiplayer. You almost have to go with like a wide mobile attack force, which does feel appropriate, but then are you going to be able to back it up quickly enough with these heavy attack units? And can you just take enough of them, I guess, is the question. Eager and disciplined low tier infantry. Yeah, probably Hargrovius. I'd imagine if any faction is going to have staff oriented stuff, they would, right? But Yeah, Scarbrand's rampage effects, they've talked about it in a few different posts in various places, but I don't think it's quite finished yet. It will be strong regardless of the kind of iteration that it comes in, because abilities like that will just, by default, it's kind of like healing or a net or something. It's just, by design, it's going to be strong, right? So, yeah, heavy metal cavalry builds, definitely the Skull Crushers and the Blood Crushers are definitely something I'm interested in as a heavy cavalry fan. Oh, yeah. I guess it depends on the mini horrors. Um yeah, maybe Zinch will have a more chaff oriented army, and I'm mostly just joking that chaff is canceled because that's all we've seen so far is two factions that are a little bit more top heavy, a little bit more elite focused, not quite so much low tier units. Flying Toggle would help Khorne a lot against factions like Bretonnia. I think you'll be fine, honestly. Scarbrand is not flying, right? He's on foot, so if you want to take a powerhouse lord on foot, Scarbrand's wings, as you can see here, have definitely seen better days. The regular Bloodthirster and the Exalted Bloodthirster will both be flying, but yeah, Scarbrand will not be flying, and I mean, you can just find something on the ground to attack. There you go. There's your land button. I know a lot of people have talked about that flying toggle for a long time as a request, and I don't see it happening, unfortunately. I don't know if it would really help all that much either. Like, if you're playing Bretonnia here, all your flying cavalry units are exceptionally squishy if they get countercharged on the ground by anything, so I just don't see them being super viable in this matchup, other than maybe Hippogriff Knights. They're just going to be so squishy here that they'll take way too much damage too quickly from Khorne. I don't know. Bretonnia, probably you're just going to want to go like 4 Grail Knights and play off of that in this matchup. I don't know. At the same time, though, having the magic resistance is almost a little bit of a liability in many situations. Or no, that's right. They're changing it, so the magic damage won't be a liability. That's right. Okay. So yes, you want Grail Knights in this matchup, like 4 Grail Knights, and maybe Knights Lionhearted, and play off of that. I don't know. CA did say Khorne is the most elite faction, so okay. Will Nurgle be the only faction with healing? No, I mean, not necessarily. Even, again, if we go back, one of Khorne's units here has healing. They do have the Blood Shrine. Heals every moment it's in melee combat. Horus Heresy with the 20. Thanks. Much appreciated. Ever generous. What do you think Chaos Spawn of Khorne being Fire and Forget faction with Perma Enrage? Interesting or stupid to have no control at all? I actually kind of like it. I like the Fire and Forget kind of tactical weapons. We have a few of those. I mean, is it that much different than a bloated corpse, right? Or like Squig Herds I covered recently are also the Clever Girls. I mean, those are all much cheaper, right? These are going to be certainly a lot more expensive of a Fire and Forget weapon, but considering how ridiculous their weapon strength is, I also think they might be potentially testing that mechanic out, because in tabletop there are a lot of units that are supposed to be kind of that way. If I'm correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I don't know. I think it's fine. I like, if anything, you can just like look at your opponent's formation and say, okay, there's a squishy weak point right there. Attack that squishy weak point, and then whatever you do after that kind of doesn't really matter as long as my opponent's formation is in shambles and they're having to micro stuff to try and avoid these raging, almost 200 weapon strength spawn, which is so ridiculous. Yeah, I kind of like it. Khorne has no ground support, no ranged units for support. You do, though. I mean, the Soul Grinder, potentially, with its ranged attack, depending on how good that is. You have the Skull Cannon as well. And who says you have to take a Bloodthirster? I mean, the thing is, if you take 2 Bloodthirsters, and this, again, kind of scales more into the air cheese of, like, who ends up taking more flying units, and it comes to a point where it just kind of gets out of hand, but I don't know. I mean, just take Scarbrand, like, I don't know. Would you want to take a Bloodthirster against Bretonnia in the first place? I mean, for rule of cool, yeah, sure, but in my mind, it's just like from the outset, like, why would you? Furies are not elite. Yeah. They have good enough attack stats, and depending on the cost, they might be able to trade well. Because keep in mind, they count as infantry, right? And Hippogriff Knights have, what, 6, 8? It was 6 unit models on large, I think. So if they're getting significantly outnumbered in that way, and the Furies are actually getting hits like in a full surround, you know, especially in the rear 180 arc, like, I don't know. It's tough to say. I'm not so worried about Bretonia's air force as I would be actually like the High Elves. Definitely don't even try a Bloodthirster against the High Elves because it seems like a really terrible idea. Gonna take Scarbrand versus Skaven? Oh yeah, for sure. Two Star Dragons? I don't know. I think the Bloodthirsters could be a little bit cheaper, like 18 to 2. I think that in the 18 to 2,000 range, which is not super cheap, but it's cheaper than. I mean, I don't know. To me, they kind of seem like a flying Shaggoth, right? Like when I look at the stats from the game I played earlier, the early access battle. I think dwarfs will match up to Khorne. Oh, that's an interesting one. Probably not great, considering the amount of armor piercing that Khorne has, and their ability to get on you quickly and deal a lot of damage. I mean, it'll be interesting, because dwarves are one of the best defensive, or not the best defensive faction, right? Their missile tools are really where a lot of their power comes from. I do think Khorne's going to be able to shut down your missile units and just destroy them very quickly. So maybe the dwarves won't be great, honestly. I think they could have a tough time here, given the amount of armor piercing. But at the same time, if the Khorne armies are too small, then you could potentially survive with some tanky width and just enough, like, presence of missiles if they can't destroy everything fast enough. Could be interesting. It's kind of like Norska in that matchup. How that plays out right now, I could see playing out in a similar fashion for dwarves, with the difference that skull cannons. I don't know. I don't know if skull cannons will be much of a factor because they probably just get out-traded by dwarven cannons at range. So, maybe not, though. We'll see. Yeah, skirmish cav will absolutely be the most obnoxious to deal with. For sure. That's I mentioned at the beginning too. I think like wood elves, dark elves are going to be really tough matchups because like Scourge Runner chariots are going to be a nightmare to deal with. All the wood elf stuff is going to be a nightmare to deal with. Any faction that's really good at kiting, like Greenskins, I think they're missile cavalry because it's short enough range you can probably get on it, and it's low enough leadership that you can probably terrify it away or just in other ways try and get rid of it. Actually not as worried about them, but other very strong kite factions like again dark elves, wood elves, they're going to be probably the toughest matchups for Khorne, I would imagine. Throne and chariot will be hard for the Dawi. Yeah, they could be. They could be. For sure. They definitely look very cool. But we talked about this quite a bit. You guys have any more questions? I probably am going to call the stream. Relatively short one today, but just wanted to kind of discuss things, compare, talk about Khorne as a general faction, how they're going to play. Let's see, did I miss anything really cool here? Let me just look through stuff I have on the side. Da-da-da-da. Oh, geez. My apologies for those of you guys wearing headphones. We've got these, yeah, here's a bit of the Fleshhounds in action. featured this in one of my intros. They definitely look awesome. Oh yeah, Hounds and Furies are going to be... That's what, like I was saying, like 4 Hounds I think is going to be mandatory for Khorne in just about every matchup, because it's the only way for you to have any numbers. And granted, Hounds are great for a number of things. They're awesome units in general. They're really very strong at doing quite a few different things. But let's see here. We also have this. This is the Blood Thrones, right? I love the motorcycle sounds. Crush and mangle, yes. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Look at the animations, man. This guy is having a great time. Okay, maybe I'm pretty excited for the Blood Throne as well. Khorne's definitely going to be a lot of fun. Definitely going to be a lot of fun in that kind of slapstick death sense. Okay, so magic resistance. Yeah, so magic resistance is changing to where it's changing from magic resistance to spell resistance, right? So it will no longer apply to like magic attacks from your standard melee and missile attacks, like for example, Grail Knights have magic attacks. That will no longer be resisted by that resistance. Instead, it will only apply to damage from spells and abilities, right? Like Wind of Death, Penumbral Pendulum, Mortis Engine. All those things will still be resisted by that spell resistance, but magic attacks in turn, again, melee, missile, will not. So it's a little bit of a nerf for dwarves, but at the same time, it's also a buff for any units which have innate magic damage, like, you know, again, Grail Knights, Blade Singers. Like, you can take them against the dwarves and have it be better. Also a nerf for somebody like the Fey Enchantress or Volkmar, who have very high magic resistance currently. They'll be much more susceptible to units with magic damage, but obviously still very resistant against spells. So, yeah. I know, right, Zach? I love that it sounds like a motorcycle. I think that's so perfect. Yeah, Bloodthirsters can catch Skirmish Cav, that's true. Yeah, so Greenskins, it's because they have limited flying tools. I also didn't talk about this too much in my Norska, or in my Kislev, rather, video. Kislev doesn't have any flying units at all, and they, depending on what lore Tempest is, they could have some units to snare, or some spells to snare flying units, or otherwise deal with them, but Kislev is going to be one of the most, like, as limited as the Skaven, if not more so, in the air, which is actually something to kind of play around, potentially. Something I kind of missed with their overall faction design, but they do have, seem to have a complete lack of any air units whatsoever. So, yeah, Greenskins, I really think Khorne will dominate the Greenskins. I really do. Like, I think any faction that relies heavily on any kind of melee rush is gonna get slapped by Khorne. Really want to waste a Bloodthirster having it chase 450 gold skirmisher unit? I doubt it. Well, it's more about just if you're able to get like one charge and terrify away several of them at the same time, you know, like catch them with some hounds while the Bloodthirster gets one quick charge, terrify them away as the hounds eat them. There you go, profit. It just solved, you know, the Greenskins problem. It's in order to deal with like certain things, like the Fey Enchantress, and also the design of demons. Like, they pretty much all demon units have magic damage, and the spell resistance as well. Like, basically what it would have meant for Khorne is all their demon units would just have 20% damage resistance, which isn't very interesting or fun. And in general, they just said for balance purposes for the demons, it just made more sense to do it that way. Yeah, probably the dwarfs will get a boost to spell resistance. I would imagine they would, to help kind of compensate. And they might also just up their armor and defensive stats a little bit across the board as well. I don't know. Obviously, all that integration is yet to come. How do I think Khorne will match up against Kislev? It'll be interesting, actually. I think Khorne could give Kislev some problems. It's been kind of funny that so far in the trailers, it's been mostly Kislev beating up Khorne. But I think in actuality, it will probably play out somewhat the opposite. It's hard to say. But because of the aggressiveness of Khorne, I think the hybrid missile melee nature of Kislev is going to be a little bit trickier. Like, the hybrid missile melee units can tend to be less cost effective at both of those things. I don't know. It's hard to say, actually. Yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of see. Kislev does have a lot of slows and control, like battlefield control, so that will help them kind of manage the rush of Khorne. And given that it's not insanely fast, like, it's definitely fast, but it's not ridiculously fast, they could actually do it. Maybe Slaanesh will be a worse matchup for Kislev. I don't know. Night Goblin Fanatics dominate. Oh, Night Goblin Fanatics. I don't know. I think Goblins are just going to die instantly. I mean, if you get off the one cast, maybe the unit pays for itself instantly as well. But, yeah. Black Orcs probably still win, to be honest. They just kill everything, as is usual. But, yeah. Tough matchups, definitely the elves. All the elves, I think, will be tough, potentially, given their ability to kite. Maybe the high elves will be the least tough. They rely most on melee. Well, I wouldn't say most, but they arguably have the weakest kite tools. Well, not arguably. They definitely, of the three elves, have the weakest kite tools. So, they might have a bad time, but we'll see. Empire Kite actually might be okay here as well, with lots of Pistoliers. Of course, Pistoliers are going to be great against Khorne because they're great against everything. And I think that's a great note to end on. So thank you all so much for coming out. I had quite a few generous tips today. I guess not quite a few, but a few. Big thanks to them. If I go over here, Horus Heresy with the question there, and I think I had a couple from, one from Ryan G. So thanks for coming out, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Hopefully some of you guys watch this after the fact, enjoy it as well. A little bit of rambling nonsense today, but that's just how it goes sometimes. So, yeah. Morgar's lore is basically losing all the time. I know, right? Yeah, it'll be interesting, Zach. I think Slaanesh will definitely be much more of a hit-and-run type faction than Khorne's just straight-up traditional rush, but it remains to be seen. Anyway, I'm hopping off for now. Thanks, guys, so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll see you guys next time, hopefully with some more news